It's always a huge pleasure to be in Craiova. It's always a huge pleasure to talk to you, Simon, and to share my outsider's impressions of this festival with RomanianActors.com. Love those Romanian actors who've been conspicuous among the successes of this festival. I've been rather overwhelmed with riches this time. I mean, this is now the largest Shakespeare-only performance festival in the world, to the best of my knowledge. The number that's being bandied about is 300 performances. I've only been here for just over a week, the entire length of the festival. I was reminded this time of my experiences of going to the Edinburgh Festival when I was a student, seeing people like Thaddeus Cantor and Ninagawa and others, where one was practically paralysed every show one went to, thinking of all the other shows one couldn't get to because they were on at the same time. This has become slightly a fear of missing out festival, as well as a great festival. I'm absolutely delighted that so much more of the city is involved in the festival now, that there's a rock festival every night, essentially, down at the Hippodrome, beyond the Parcul Nicolae Romanescu, where people with no interest at all in Shakespeare can have a share of festivity. And there is a kind of continuity between Shakespearean comedy and loud open-air dancing of all kinds. I don't think that's inappropriate. It's good to see that the initiative from last festival of having performances by flute for the local autistic community has continued, and I hope that will extend. There have been wonderfully large numbers of incredibly nice students as volunteers in the festival, carrying it and administering it and being around it. It'd be nice to see more of Craiova University students involved in it, I think. I mean, one of the most attractive and one of the tightest shows I saw was actually done by drama students from Bucharest who were doing Midsummer Night's Dream in the courtyard of the Museum of Writers and Exiles. But I have felt a bit pressed by the programming. I've been sprinting out to Colibri and back and hurrying down the slope to the student house. I mean, it's very good exercise, but there's a risk that the program may have too much going on at the same time. I managed to miss André Serban's Twelfth Night, something embarrassingly I only found out about when I bumped into him, bringing a little more of his archive to the Museum of Writers and Exiles. But as always, the stuff I've seen has been of a fantastic standard. There have been great shows which I'm unlikely to forget, and a lot of silence. I mean, it's one of the curious tendencies apparently in Shakespearean performance worldwide that's been very much visible over this week. Shows in which there is less text, fewer words than one expects from Shakespeare, who is, after all, an amazingly wordy playwright. I mean, much writing about Shakespeare goes on as though it was only the words. But I've seen Tang Shu Wing's King Lear, which is non-verbal. I mean, there are some howls. There's an extraordinary soundscape, but there's not much of the text, if any, and it's even quite hard to follow the narrative. It's more a kind of abstract, postmodern ballet not performed by dancers, going from one very striking and often very distressing image to another. And it's hard for me not to read that, given Tang Shu Wing's home location of Hong Kong, as being a show about being silenced. A show you can't paraphrase, a show you couldn't ban for having said anything in particular, because it doesn't say anything explicitly, it doesn't say anything in words at all. And Declan Donnell and Nick Ormerod's production of Hamlet at the Marin Sorescu, using the local company here in Craiova, who are terrific. Here was a production of Hamlet in which the whole of the last duel scene was silent. Hamlet said the rest is silence, not to mean that he was dying, but to mean, okay, from now on it's a kind of silent movie and a kind of silent action movie. I thought it was interesting. I mean, there's a long tendency in Hamlet criticism and in Hamlet performance of wanting to avoid the last scene or wanting to postpone the last scene, which obviously is largely what Hamlet's own role is about. Valuing that play for its scenes of politics and introspection and speculation and improvisation, and being rather embarrassed that it all finishes in a big revenge bloodbath at the end. Wanting to change the ending, wanting just not to deal with it. In a way, turning it into something silent is another way of sort of throwing it away. I felt a bit cheated. I prefer to know what characters are thinking, because I like it when they tell me. And they didn't in that. Just as they didn't, or at least not verbally, in one of the great shows of the festival, the amazing New Hamlet by Robert Lepage, which is a ballet, or rather a dance, in that it involves dance forms that aren't classical ballet, elements of street dance. There are wonderful ways in which the changes of register in the verbal text of Hamlet are expressed by changes in the kind of dance that the dancers are doing, from a very classically trained Ophelia to elements of street dance being done by her brother Laertes, who's spinning on the floor like a break dancer on a Manhattan street. A fantastic show, really beautiful, really impressive, superbly choreographed, with amazing precision and just astonishing technical control, the way Lepage's shows always have. But that left me wondering how far it was in earnest. What are we left with when we get Hamlet without the words? We get fantastic dances about the relations between people and a pretty efficient way of narrating the narrative of what happens to those people. But the whole intellectual content of the play is sort of not there, except in images, great images, memorable images. Ophelia's suicide. I mean, the death of Ophelia is the minute you abandon Shakespeare's text and go into another medium, the death of Ophelia is what artists of all kinds go wild for, and to have her dancing into a horizontal flood which catches her and buoys her up, so suddenly you're watching her from above in this huge cloth rippling river, is an amazing piece of work. But the whole production is distanced from us by its styling. It goes in for a kind of meta-theatricality that refers entirely to theatre styles of the past. It's all about red curtains and the kind of chandeliers you used to get in 19th century opera sets, and the kind of costuming that one gets in Hollywood historical movies of the mid and earlier 20th century, which keeps it at a distance to me. As I say, I wasn't sure how much it was in earnest, and I didn't feel great pathos. It's something I have slightly missed in many shows in this production, and this iteration of the festival. There have been some very powerful shows, some shows with shocking violence in them, like that King Lear from Moldova, where we saw the hanging of Cordelia on stage. But it hasn't been about achieving pathos, engaging the hearts of the spectators with the hearts of the characters, and that's one of the main mechanisms that Shakespeare uses. Both of the dreams I've seen, the student one and Flute's dream, were intensely empathetic and were very personal in that way, very human. They were about what we have in common, about the feelings shared between actors and audience. But many of the shows I've been seeing here have been sort of post-dramatic or ironized, or they've been too angry or anxious or confused to use that mainspring of engaging an audience through feeling. I think I've only cried once during this particular festival. That's very unusual for me. I'm an extremely sentimental theatre goer. You know, I want to cry if I can find an excuse for so doing. But the only time I've cried during this festival so far was actually at the orchestral concert by the Oltenia Philharmonic, who had the most fantastic guest cellist with them, Octavian Loop, and his playing of the first Haydn cello concerto just got to me, and his second encore, which very cornerly was of his arrangement of Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Oh, you know, I was melting into the carpet. You know, and it sort of reminded me of an element I've been missing from many of the productions I've seen. Tonight I'll be seeing Rostislav Dezhepilsky's Romeo and Juliet from Ivano-Frankivsk. I love Rostislav's work. I adored his Hamlet when I saw it straight after Craiova in 2018 in Ivano-Frankivsk. The Hamlet, which is a very famous production, it's toured a bit and it's well known in Ukraine, has lots of black comedy in it. It's sort of Ostermeyer plus in some ways. It's sort of Ostermeyer plus a lot of slightly camp pop culture, gothic. I mean, Hamlet is allowed to break the frame and just deal directly with the audience, and that's something, again, that's something that I felt was missing from Lepage's ballet. You can't really do that in dance in the same way unless Hamlet's going to come and dance all over every single member of the audience, which is a bit tiring. And I'm very, very curious to see how his Romeo and Juliet is going to look after 2 years of war, whether it'll be so intense that we'll all be in floods of tears, or whether it will be so much concerned to make its own intellectual points that perhaps we won't be able to engage with it like that. You know, I'm just curious to see what he's doing and how his work's changed, because I haven't seen anything he's directed since the war started. You know, and I'm going to talk with him. You know, I'm going to do a post-show conversation with him. So I'm very, very keen to see him. Perhaps I'll cry. You know, perhaps I'll cry just at seeing Rostislav again. It's perfectly possible, and I'm not sure that would be a bad thing. But an astonishing Craiova festival, as always. It's a privilege to be at what is now the largest Shakespeare-only performance festival in the world, even if it at times can be a slightly exhausting privilege too.